Congregation reading is responsive. It's number 592. I'll read the Roman, and you read the italic. I'll give you a chance to find it. 592. The free mind. Okay? I call that mind free which masters the senses, which recognizes its own reality and greatness,
which passes life, not in asking whether it shall eat or drink, but in hungering, thirsting, and seeking after righteousness.
I call that mind free which jealously guards its intellectual rights and powers, which does not content itself with a passive or hereditary faith,
which opens itself to light whensoever it may come, which receives new truth as an angel from heaven.
I call that mind free which is not passively framed by outward circumstances and is not the creature of accidental impulse,
which discovers everywhere the radiant signatures of the infinite Spirit, and in them finds help to its own spiritual enlargement.
I call that mind free which protects itself against the usurpations of society and which does not cower to human opinion,
which refuses to be the slave or tool of many or of a few, and guards its empire over itself as nobler than the empire of the world.
I call that mind free which resists the bonds of habit, which does not mechanically copy the past nor live on its old virtues,
but which listens for new and higher conditions of conscience, and rejoices to pour itself forth in fresh and higher exertions.
I call that mind free which sets no bounds to its love, which wherever they are seen delights in virtue and sympathizes with suffering,
which recognizes in all human beings the image of God and the rights of God's children, and offers itself up as a sacrifice to the cause of humankind.
I call that mind free which has cast off all fear but that of wrongdoing, and which no menace or peril can enthrall.
cosmology group, which has met for quite a long time, has been reviewing the ins and outs of the scientific story.
Michael, can you put the microphone up a little bit? Maybe?
Right, I can. Better?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better.
In ancient times, Thank you. In ancient human times, there are many stories or myths written how the world began and how we got here. How do these creation myths influence our modern thinking of the world? And what role does modern science have in evaluating or shaping these myths? Karen Armstrong, anybody ever read Karen Armstrong, The Battle for God? Excellent book. Author of Battle for God, A History of Fundamentalism, calls creation stories and myths concerning what was thought to be timeless and constant in our existence. Myth was not concerned with practical matters, but with meaning. And so think back 800 years, 2,000 years before science had explanations of the meaning of why we're here. And various different religions came up with their own stories about how we got here. And these are creation myths. Another way of saying this is a creation myth or creation story is a cultural, traditional, or religious myth which describes the earliest beginnings of the present world. They're usually considered cosmogonical truths, myths and truths, or a description of how the universe evolved from nothingness, or an amorphous state. Nothingness is a Buddhist term, by the way. Creation myths are widespread throughout human culture. They're not just with the Abrahamic faith, they're with earth religions, and with a lot. But as we're going to find out with Confucianism, there's some that do not have creation myths at all. The following is an overview of the religious creation myths of the most predominant religions. I sort of picked them out without getting into the earth religions, which is a whole other lecture, class, whatever, in terms of numbers of adherents in the East and West. So I'm going to cover creation myths of various Eastern and Western religions, and then I'm going to compare and contrast with the scientific creation story. And let's see what we come up with. It'll be interesting. So, there are 4 Abrahamic faiths. Sometimes people think there are 3, but there's actually 4. Jewish, Islam, and Christian, and of course Baha'i. Baha'i is the 4th Abrahamic faith. And in the Jewish, Islamic, and Christian traditions, the idea of the creation of the world is very similar. All 3 faiths. And a number of you may be familiar with Genesis 1:1 to 1:31. I went back and read it the other day. I've read it several times, but it's been a very long time. And the myth goes something like this. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty. Then God created light and darkness on the first day. Next, God divided the waters from the land. After that, creatures of the earth were created, fish and birds and so forth. That was followed by humans, and then God rested. That's pretty much what it says. Islam has a little bit of a different version of this in that it, in Quran 11:7, it talks about a 6th period type of thing where creation occurred. But it's essentially the same story in all 3 Abrahamic faiths. Okay, so that's the Abrahamic faith in a nutshell. What about Baha'i? The 4th Abrahamic faith takes a different take. In Baha'i, the universe had neither beginning nor ending. And the material world has always existed and will continue to exist. The world of existence came to be through the heat generated from the interaction between the active force and that which is its recipient. Baha'i does not take the Genesis story of the Abrahamic faith terribly literally. It's a story in the Baha'i faith, which is interesting because that kind of parallels what the Eastern religions have to say in many different ways, which I'm going to talk about now. So, Buddhism, a religion I know a lot about, as you all might know. A lot of you might know. Buddha emphasized practices over beliefs and to become enlightened. And the Buddha described the universe being destroyed and then re-evolving into its present form over a period of countless millions of years. The first life form on the surface of the water and again, over countless millions of years, evolved from simple into complex organisms. So there's an evolutionary component in Buddhism that all Buddhists believe. And eventually the universe is again destroyed, and another arises in its place, which may or may not explain the Big Bang Theory, which I will talk about in a little while. All these processes, without beginning or end, are set in motion by natural causes. Confucianism has no creation myth. It's more of a philosophy of good living than a religion. So that's interesting. Not every one of them has a creation myth, but a lot do. Hinduism. Hinduism is pretty interesting. There are a lot of creation myths, variations of the creation myth in Hinduism. But essentially, the worldview is a cyclical notion of time, and it happens over and over again, much like what Buddhists believe, so there's a lot of affinity between the two. Additionally, the universe is considered to be one of many, all enclosed, quote, like innumerable bubbles floating in space. Within this universe, there are three main regions: the heavenly planets, the earthly realm, and the lower worlds. And the scripture in Hindu, depending on which deity, and there are several of them, but there are three major ones, goes into various different aspects of how humans and animals and plants came about. Jainism. Anybody ever studied Jainism before? Jains do not believe in a creator deity and that could be responsible for the creation and manifestation of the universe. The universe is self-regulated by the laws of nature. Jains believe that life exists in various forms in different parts of the universe, including the Earth. So again, this emphasis is different than the Abrahamic faith. Shintoism, I really like the Shinto tradition in Japan. It's very interesting and elegant artwork as well as anything else. According to the Japanese Shinto mythology, at the beginning of time, the heavens and the earths were mixed together in a great cloud. Gradually, the cloud separated. The clearer parts of the cloud rose up and became heaven. The heavier parts of the clouds descended and became an ocean of muddy water. Between the heavens and the earth, a pale green sprout began to grow. When the plant's flowers burst open, the first god emerged. This first god then created Anunnaki, the god of all that is light and heavenly, and his wife, Asanami. Asanaki was then presented with the task of finishing the creation of the world. Standing on a rainbow called Amno, I'm sure I'm butchering the Japanese, so anybody who speaks Japanese, forgive me, Ukahashi, the floating bridge of the heavens, he plunged a jewel-crested spear into the ocean. When they pulled the spear back, the water that dripped from the spear began to form the first island of the Japanese archipelago. Everything is focused on Japan, right? Asanagi and Asanami, when settled down on the island together, they made the islands of Japan, which in this tradition is kind of like the center of the universe. Interesting. Sikhism. I had some contact with them when I was traveling in the subcontinent of India a few years ago, Sikh temples and so forth. Anyhow, Sikhism states that God created the entire universe, and the universe, including the earth, has been evolving since then. Earth, while being in the universe, is a creation of God, and all of the life of the earth is a creation of God. Sikhism instructs that the universe has been going on for billions of years, not 6,000, but billions of years. Taoism, the Taoist creation theory posits an inflationary universe, which is what science says at the moment is the going theory of the Big Bang and the universe, which we'll look at in a few moments. And it's formed into an energy field that was spontaneously birthed by the Tao. The Tao is a limitless void, also called Wuxi, a limitless field of Wu, or non-being. The Wuxi is described by the mystical scriptures to be infinite in size, bottomless and deep, profoundly empty, obscure, formless, soundless, beyond the normal senses to grasp. In other words, infinity, if you think about it. Zoroastrianism, which is my final religion, and their creation myth, it says that in the beginning there was nothing in the world but Ahura Mazda, the wise lord who lived in the endless light, and the evil spirit, Ahura who lived in the absolute darkness. And between these realms was emptiness. One day, Ahura Mazda decided to make different creations. First, he shaped the sky made of metal, shining and bright. Second, he made pure water. Third, he created the earth. flat and round, with no mountains or valleys. Fourth, he made the plants moist with no thorns. Fifth, created animals big and small. Then the Zoroastrian creation myth continues. He created the first man, called Geomar, bright, tall, and handsome, of course. Last, he created fire and distributed it. The wise Lord then created women and ordered fire to serve mankind, humankind, and preparing food and overcoming cold. So this last one is much more, changed the names of the deities. It's much more along the lines of the Abrahamic faith, which is much more of a personalized kind of deal. Everything else that I read in the Eastern tradition is a process having to do with an infinite, formless universe of one sort or the other. Okay, so let's compare and contrast that with the science part of this. According to Karen Armstrong again, Logos was the rational, pragmatic, and scientific thought that enabled men and women to function well in the world. In science, the overall process involves making conjectures, hypotheses, deriving predictions from them as logical consequences, and then carrying out experiments based on those predictions to determine whether the original conjecture was correct. So let's talk about the cosmology prediction story, which is a really fantastic tale, as I hope you agree. About 13.7 billion years ago, according to all scientific research, the Big Bang occurred. And since that time, the universe has evolved through many phases and epochs. And I'm going to go through it kind of in a descriptive fashion, but know that as I'm talking about this, a lot of this has been, or all of this has been, upheld so far by scientific research and study. The Planck era, and we don't know very much about what happened in this very early period in terms of what reality was, what physics was, whether was it a deity or not that created this universe and so forth. But what we do know is that this was about 0 to approximately 10 to the minus 43rd seconds right after the Big Bang. This is about as close to absolute time, the beginning of time, that we know about. And little known about it. It's hypothesized that there are four fundamental forces in the universe: electromagnetism, gravity, weak nuclear force, and strong nuclear force. And they were probably unified into one force. So gravity and electromagnetism are all one thing. At this point, the universe spans a region of about 10 to 35 meters.
Wow.
Think about that. And the temperature was 100 billion Kelvin. 100 billion Kelvin. With a density more than 1 billion times that of water. 10 to the 43rd to 10 to the 32nd is the grand unification period, and that's where gravity separates from the other fundamental forces I was talking about. Then we get into the inflationary period, 10 to the 36th to 10 to the 32nd, minus, by the way, triggered by the separation of strong nuclear force. The universe undergoes an extremely rapid exponential expansion known as cosmic inflation, which, according to scientific theory, is going on to this day. Electroweak epoch, 10 to the 36, minus 36, 10 to the minus 12. The strong nuclear force separates from the other two. The quark epoch, 10 to the minus 12, 10 to the minus 6. Quarks, electrons, and neutrinos form in large numbers as the universe cools off below 10 quadrillion degrees. Cools off. And the four fundamental forces assume their present forms. During the Hadron epoch, 10 to the minus 6 to about 1 second after the Big Bang, the temperature of the universe cools to about 1 trillion degrees. Cool enough to allow quarks to combine to form hadrons, protons, and neutrons. Electrons colliding with protons in the extreme conditions of the Hadron epoch fuse to form neutrons and give off massless neutrinos, which continue to travel freely through space today. In the lepton epoch, from 1 second to 3 minutes, the majority, but not all, of hadrons and antihadrons annihilate each other at the end of the hadron epoch. Leptons, I know there's all these words with naming them, anti-leptons dominate the mass of the universe. and they continue to collide. In the nucleosynthesis, from 3 minutes to 20 minutes, the temperature of the universe falls to about 1 billion degrees. Where atomic nuclei can begin to form as protons and neutrons combine with nuclear fusion. And about 20 minutes after the Big Bang, the temperature and density of the universe has fallen to the point where nuclear fusion cannot continue. In the photon epoch, or the radiation period, from 3 minutes to 240,000 years, there's a gradual cooling. The universe is filled with a plasma, a hot, opaque soup of atomic nuclei and electrons. Just imagine this reality here. That's what the whole universe was about, including in this region as well. The photons have the density of lead during this period, light. During recombination and decoupling from 240,000 to 300,000 years, the temperature of the universe falls to about the same heat as the surface of our sun, and its density also continues to decrease. By the end of the period, the universe consists of a fog of about 75% hydrogen and 25% helium, with just traces of lithium. In the Dark Age, or Dark Era, from 300,000 to 150 million years after the Big Bang, before the first stars in the universe, it was literally dark. Everything in the universe was dark. And no stars were giving off light at this time. The universe was dominated, according to one predominant theory, by the mysterious dark matter and dark energy. During reionization, 150 million to 1 billion years, the first quasars form, and from this point on, most of the universe goes back from being neutral to being composed of ionized plasmas. We start getting light again. Gravity amplifies slight irregularities, and the universe continues to expand rapidly. And at this point in time, the first stars form. Later, the galaxies. Our solar system, 8.5 to 9 billion years after the Big Bang. And our sun is a late generation star, incorporating the debris from many generations of earlier stars, and it and the solar system around it formed roughly 4.5 to 5 billion years ago. So today, 13.7 billion years later, the expansion of the universe continues, and recycling of star material and stardust and star stuff continues as well. And we're going to show a little video on the early stars and galaxies.
Astronomers in 1996 attempted to do something extraordinary. They pointed the Hubble Space Telescope into a part of the sky that seemed utterly empty, a patch devoid of any planets, stars, and galaxies. This area was close to the Big Dipper, a very familiar constellation, and the patch of sky was no bigger than a grain of sand held out at arm's length. This was a somewhat risky move by the scientists. After all, observing time on this telescope is in very high demand, and some wasted trying to look at nothing. There was a real risk that the images returned would be as black as the space at which it was being pointed. Nevertheless, they opened the telescope, and slowly, over the course of 10 full days, photons that had been traveling for over 13 billion years finally ended their journey on the detector of humanity's most powerful telescope. Their feeble signals collected almost one by one. When the telescope was finally closed and the images were processed, the light from over 3,000 galaxies had covered the detector, producing one of the most profound and humbling images in all of human history. Every single spot, smear, and dot was an entire galaxy, and each one containing hundreds of billions of stars. Later, in 2004, they did it again, this time pointing the telescope towards an area near the constellation Orion. They opened the shutter for over 11 days and 400 complete orbits around the Earth. Using detectors with increased sensitivity and filters that allowed more light through than ever before, over 10,000 galaxies appeared in what became known as the ultra-deep field. an image that represented the farthest we've ever seen into the universe. The photons from these galaxies left when the universe was only 500 million years old. And 13 billion years later, they end their long journey as a small blip on a telescope CCD. These galaxies, while standing absolutely still, are racing away from us, in some cases, faster than the speed of light. The space-time between us and everything else grows larger by the minute, pushing the galaxies in this image to a distance of over 47 billion light years. And because of universal expansion, the farther something is away from us, the more its light is shifted toward the red, and the faster it appears to be moving. Edwin Hubble himself discovered this by measuring the redshift of many galaxies, and it's a measure of not only speed, but distance as well. Recently, Hubble scientists put the icing on the cake. Using the measured redshifts of all the galaxies inside the image, they made a 3D model of the ultra-deep field. This is how it looks when we apply the distances of the galaxies in the most important image ever taken. There are over 100 billion galaxies in the universe. Simply saying that number doesn't really mean much to us because it doesn't provide any context. Our brains have no way to accurately put that in any meaningful perspective. When we look at this image, however, and think about the context of how it was made, and really understand what it means, we instantly gain the perspective and cannot help but be forever changed by it. We pointed the most powerful telescope ever built by human beings at absolutely nothing, for no other reason than because we were curious, and discovered that we occupy a very tiny place in the heavens.
Of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam in particular, fundamentalists have risen up to challenge in many manifestations the scientific creation story that you just saw and heard about. Karen Armstrong suggests that fundamentalists have turned their mythos into a logos in reaction to the rationalism and science of the modern age, starting with the 18th century Enlightenment. Fundamentalists see their struggle as one of a cosmic war between good and evil, affirm their identity by selecting doctrines and practices from the past, often oppose the pragmatic rationalism of modernity, such as Hubble's images there, for instance, and eventually fight back and attempt to sacralize the skeptical world. Their worldview is absolutist, never changing, and dualistic, based on a purity of ancient religious myths. Dualistic in the sense of light and darkness, with those outside the view being polluted and sinful. History will ultimately lead to the end times of the war of good and evil. In essence, their mythos has been turned into a logos regarding the scientific age. Anybody know who Ken Ham is? He had a lot of interesting stuff about...
I've cataloged his children's books. They're the worst books I've ever had on my desk.
Yeah, and his websites are equally bad. But he attacked the recent Cosmos series as not being scientific, particularly the objection to the Big Bang Theory, because it clashed with his absolutist fundamentalist Christian. It could be Jewish, it could be Islam. ISIS, for instance, has banned the teaching of evolution out there. So it's not just the Christian faith that does this, and Orthodox Jews do the same thing. So what is clear, however, is that modern science has researched and discovered a universe of awesome realities that has evolved over 13.7 billion years since the Big Bang. Any modern creation myth that cannot incorporate this is off the mark. In the beginning, the early universe was and is, besides the Earth, a radically different place. Ultra-hot, dense, a borean gaseous state, to name a few things. Any deity of that time would have to surpass this or thrive in this very radically different reality. Even to this day, humans are not able to survive in almost all parts of the expanding universe. Any creation story needs to account for this. We are not the center of existence in the slightest. The mysteries and the truths with a little t, of the universe continue to unfold. What is dark matter and dark energy, for example? We still don't know. These are things that science is attempting to find out. While science continues to fill in through the scientific method and research of the creation story, debate continues about whether and then the nature of any deity that had and has had a hand in this as embodied in a number of modern religious creation stories. However, myths of religion need to also evolve and accommodate with the astounding findings of logos through science. Can mythos and logos coexist, assuming a belief in a deity? Yes. Science does not know what caused and happened immediately after, before, and during the Big Bang. Regardless, the nature of the debate about creation continues to evolve. In the modern age, we need the tools of understanding. Science does not know all truths, but understands some important ones. This understanding grows. In order to understand the universe, the key premise is that all realities on Earth and beyond are impermanent, never changing, as the Buddhists say, and a lot of other Eastern religions as well. The creation story of the universe, both from science and many religions, shows a place that is continually evolving. It does not say the same as fundamentalists mistakenly posit. Our role, I think, is to observe and understand a lot of this amazing evolution and this fundamental reality that all changes in a wildly complex place and process where stars are born and galaxies collide. I view that a mythos cannot change, as it is supposedly a logos cannot be in sync with the reality of the nature of creation. The crux of this conflict of worldviews is that this is not a story of noble absolutes of reality. Goddess or God, if you believe in him or her, this mysterious and ever-changing universe that is wondrous and indeed very ancient. Thank you.